Hey, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of the Virtual Training Institute 8.0. As you come in, please put your name and where you're from in the chat box so that we have an idea who's in the presentation with us. So while you're coming in, I want to go over just a few housekeeping items. So just to let you, just a reminder that you will get your proof of participation approximately 24 hours after the session ends, and it will come directly from Zoom. You will also find an evaluation that will pop up when the session ends. So please take a minute or two to provide some feedback. I want to also remind you that we are in webinar mode, so you do not have the ability to unmute yourself, but please use the chat box to make any comments or provide responses or to ask any questions. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll, and if you could just take a second or two to let us know what your role in adult education is. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And as we might expect, large number of the participants are instructors and a few instructional specialists and transition specialists. So I am going to turn it over to Katie York for her presentation on Neurodiversity 101.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Katie York. I'm with the Community College of Baltimore County. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you see me kind of look a little bit away, I'm working on multiple screens. So I have my PowerPoint up on one screen and this camera is on the other screen. So my apologies, I am paying attention. On your screen, you should see a slide that says Neurodiversity 101. And then there's a disclaimer. The content or opinions expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect or present the views, positions, or policies of the Maryland Department of Labor, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply an official endorsement by the Maryland Department of Labor. So sessions expectations. I'm really passionate about neurodiversity. Some of my colleagues that are joining me from CCBC might be aware of that because I am involved in a number of different neurodiversity related projects here at CCBC. If I'm speaking too fast, feel free to tell me. I won't get upset. In this case, you're not able to unmute yourself and have camera on because we're in webinar mode. So you can ignore that one. Feel free to stim, fidget, whatever you need during the session. Please feel free to use the chat at any point. And please ask questions. There is a Q&A option, but you can also use the chat. So a little bit about me. For visual description, I am a white femme presenting person in my mid-30s. I wear glasses. I have short brown hair. I'm wearing a blue striped shirt. As far as educational, I've been working in community colleges for almost 15 years, both at CCBC and Cecil College. My training is sociology backgrounds. I am pursuing an MS in disability services and higher education. I point that out just because a lot of folks see when I'm in health and human services, they automatically think health, and I'm more the human services end of things. Here at CCBC, we have a group called Neurodiversity Unbound. It is for staff and faculty that are interested in neurodiversity, interested in supporting neurodivergent learners and colleagues here at the college. So I'm a trainer with that. I also founded a group called Harford County Neurodivergent, which is a community support group for people who are adults in Harford County and nearby areas. And then I also myself have lived experience both as a neurodivergent individual and a parent of someone who's neurodivergent. So you've heard me use this term a ton already, but I'm interested in your feedback. What is your experience with the term neurodiversity or neurodivergent? What do you think of when you hear that? So in the chat, there's a link, menti.com. It shouldn't ask you to log in or anything like that. It should go straight to a word cloud. I'm going to pause share for a moment. If you're not able to use the link, you can also just go to menti.com and type in 8244-7217. Because I know sometimes, depending on how you're joining, links don't always work. All right, I see some responses coming in. All right, awesome, thank you.
So somebody's asking, what should we type there?
Thank you. So my apologies, my screen froze for a minute, so I was just trying to adjust. So I wasn't able to share. So let me share this with you now. So just what do you think of when you think of the term neurodiversity or neurodivergent? What are your connections? So in the center are the ones that have been suggested or typed the most: ADHD and autism. I also see spectrum, not linear talker, OCD, inclusiveness, expansive, Asperger's, dyslexia, ADD. So there's a number of thoughts, but you can see in the center, ADHD and autism are the largest because they're the ones that folks have responded to the most. So let me switch back over to the PowerPoint. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, it seems to be a little bit of a lag. Are you able to see the slide now?
Yes.
Okay, so just a quick session overview, because as a autistic neurodivergent individual, I like to kind of know what is going on. If at any point, if you have questions after this session, you can use that Menti link up to, I think, about 2 weeks after. So for neurodiversity, I always like to use the example of trees and plants in general. It is a special interest of mine, but also it's something that most folks are pretty familiar with. When you think about neurodiversity, think of the phrase biodiversity. So we're thinking about how there are trees that might be pine trees or oak trees, maple, sumac, all these different types of trees. They're all trees, but they have different presentations. They might be used for different things. There might be some trees that are hosts for certain types of animals or insects. There might be certain types of trees that are harvested for their wood or something like that. So they're all under that umbrella of trees. Neurodiversity is kind of that similar concept, that we know that there's a lot of different types of brains. It's a natural and neutral variation in human brains that we are going to see. Just with the diversity of individuals, everyone's brain's a little bit different. And the traditional neurotype is considered neurotypical. This is what we might expect, how someone's brain might use. Another term might be average. But there's no cure that's needed for neurodivergent neurotypes. So someone who is atypical or neurodivergent, the goal is that we would accept that this is in existence. We would make accommodations and provide support and inclusion, and appreciate the benefits that a diverse society brings to us. The neurodivergent umbrella is really large. I mean, for me, I always say the more the merrier. A lot of people think of ADHD and autism as pretty much the only thing for neurodiversity, but there are a lot of different neurodivergent types. And if you are looking at this umbrella image, you might look at it and say, wow, I didn't know until today that I am considered neurodivergent. So welcome to the club. We have fidget toys and cookies and all sorts of fun stuff. But you'll just see that there's things like OCD, epilepsy, sensory processing, dyslexia, depression, and other mental illnesses all fall under that umbrella of neurodivergent. For me, I choose to use neuro-affirming language. I try to avoid using what we might consider traditionally medicalized language. There is, though, a lot of terms related to different neurodivergent neurotypes that is medically based, particularly if someone is seeking support that might need to be through a healthcare system that insurance needs to cover. Sometimes the terms are more medical. But when I'm speaking about autism, for me, I choose to use identity first. I am autistic versus person first language. I have autism, because everything is through that filter, that lens of autism. So for me, I can't separate myself. It's not something that I have. To me, it's, saying a person with autism, to me, it sounds kind of like saying, person with left-handedness. It just doesn't quite sound right. You're just left-handed. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is different than the typical majority of folks, maybe right-handed. So that's just kind of how I hear it. I always recommend, though, that you talk to an individual to see what their preference may be, because it is important to identify people the way they want to be identified. I also do not use the term Asperger's or Aspie, simply because it's not a category for diagnosis any longer. It's all autism. There's not levels or parts of the spectrum. Additionally, it is related to Hans Asperger, who colluded with the Nazis in Germany during World War II to do a lot of really horrible tests and treatment, for lack thereof, of individuals. And so for me, that is the connection I make for it. I know some people may have been identified or diagnosed with Asperger's because it was a formal diagnosis category for, I believe, about 15 years. And so if that is your preference, you are more than welcome to identify yourself as that way. But if you do not fall into that category, I ask that you consider using different language. I also choose to use learning disabilities instead of learning disorder, because disability is not a bad word. There's nothing wrong with being disabled. I identify as being disabled. but it is not negative. It's a neutral term. However, disorder really kind of connotates this negative. There's something wrong. When you come into a room and you say, oh, it's so disorderly, the implication is that you want to fix it, change it, make it better, cleaner, straighter, whatever it may be. So that's just something that we keep in mind. I also, again, try to avoid medicalized language like symptoms and using traits. When it comes to autism, again, I also do not use functioning labels. Like someone will say, someone is, high functioning, or someone is, autism level 2. I choose to not do that because there really is not a great, it's really not a great indicator of the individual. So someone might say that because I'm here presenting on this, that I'm high functioning. But if you see me in a different situation, maybe, outside of my home in a mall, I might be wearing, sunglasses and have, earplugs in indoors because it's just so much sensory overload. It's difficult for me to process. So it really it's not very useful. And it really serves to kind of separate individuals. So when we're talking about functioning labels, we can say, if you really truly need to delineate something, you can say support needs, high support needs, low support needs, but even then, again, that really fluctuates. And a lot of times functioning labels in autism will be used to deny agency to someone who's perceived as low functioning, and then used to deny support for someone who's labeled as high functioning. In the chat, someone asked, what about learning difference? So for me, I really am not a huge fan of a lot of euphemisms to try to avoid the term disability, just because, again, disability is a neutral term. I know that there are some folks who do prefer that, but that's something that I would, again, talk with the individual, because a lot of times folks don't want to use the term disability because of internalized ableism. There's a lot of loaded stigma and language surrounding that term, but you can choose to use that. The biggest thing is that when you're talking with someone from the community, you're seeking what they choose to identify themselves. Like I mentioned, in the word cloud, autism and ADHD came up as the two biggest ones for neurodiversity or neurodivergent. So those are the two main ones I'm going to talk about. This neurotype is defined as persistent deficits in social communication, social interaction across multiple contexts, and restrictive, repetitive patterns of behaviors, interests, or activities. It's a lot of words. And again, because it is in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that is used for psychiatrists and other healthcare professionals to diagnose someone clinically as being autistic. But it really is a note of how we have categorized and perceived autistic people throughout the world. When we talk about autism spectrum, a lot of times people think of like a left to right spectrum. You're either more autistic or you're less autistic, somewhere in between. But really, I like to think of it in the image that's shared as kind of a pie chart, that there are just some folks that may have maybe more strengths in communication, but maybe struggle with perception, or they may have more strengths in filtering out sensory inputs, but maybe struggle with changes in routine, that sort of thing. So there's just really, it helps to kind of identify that we don't just say, someone is kind of more autistic or less autistic, that there's a lot of different factors in play. One of the biggest things you notice in the DSM definition is communication. So autistic individuals have a different style of communicating a lot of times than allistic for non-autistic people. We may be more likely to be non-speaking, and I use that term deliberately instead of non-verbal, because someone may not use mouth words, but they may still be able to express through signing or spelling using an AAC or augmentative alternative communication device. If you are not familiar with the term AAC, Just think about, a lot of folks think about Stephen Hawkins and how he had the mouthpiece and the computer voice. That's a really very high level type of AAC. But you probably in your life have used something other than mouth words to communicate. You probably sent an email. You may have commented in this chat using text. You may have sent a text on a phone to someone. So we all use different forms of communication besides mouth words. But someone who's autistic might be more likely to have unreliable access to mouth words. We also tend to be a bit more direct. I always like to point out, though, that nothing on the DSM said that autistic definition category, one of the traits has to be that we are rude. Sometimes, though, there are people that are rude that are autistic, and there are people that are autistic that are rude. However, a lot of times individuals who are autistic may struggle with asking questions. We want to know why. Why is this way? And so sometimes that can be perceived as challenging authority or somehow negative, when the goal is really just to try to figure out, are you asking me this because of this, or do you need this information? Like, I need more information to figure out how to respond, and it's coming across as a challenge. Also with humor, a lot of folks tend to think that autistic individuals can't be humorous. Personally, I think I'm hilarious. However, you can ask my family for their opinion, but a lot of times individuals who are autistic, we may not necessarily laugh at all the jokes, not necessarily because we don't get them, because we just don't think they're funny. If it's something that's at the expense of an individual, a lot of people who are autistic and otherwise neurodivergent may have grown up being bullied or being segregated in the K through 12 classroom setting and being called names for having to go to the special classroom or something like that. And so there's a lot of emotions connected to those kind of jokes. So when we hear them, we may not necessarily find the humor in it because we relate it so much to our own personal experience. Not to say that's true for everyone, but I just know that that's something that comes up a lot. I'm in several groups, Facebook, etc., designed for autistic individuals to share memes and jokes and stuff like that. One's called like the Autism Comedy Club. And so there's, something that might be funny in the community based on our experiences, but just to know that being humorous is not necessarily, again, a trait of someone who's autistic. The other big thing is how we process our senses, how we filter input or are unable to filter input. So it might be someone who's autistic doesn't necessarily have a stronger or better sense of hearing, but we struggle to filter out some of the white noise. In the interest of time, I want to kind of go into the other main characteristic of autistic individuals is stimming. It's short for self-stimulatory behavior. Stimming is a human behavior, though. It is not strictly someone who's autistic. It could be physical movement. A lot of times folks connect someone who kind of flaps their arms as acting or being autistic. However, if you were on The Price is Right and you get called down, those people are jumping and screaming. I think statistically, they can't all be autistic. So it's just something to keep in mind that when you're bored, you tap your fingers. When you are nervous, you might pace. So stimming is a human behavior. It's just often associated with autism, or it might be more obvious. We might do it more because it is a way to soothe. It's a way to express an emotion like anger, happiness. It also is just a way to pass time. You sit there and you think of the phrase twiddling your thumbs, like the kind of hand fidget thing. Stimming can just look very different depending on the individual. Some folks might clear their throat a lot or make some kind of noise or repeat a word or something like that. So I want to pause. I know that we have a short time and a lot to go over. Are there any questions, though? Seeing nothing in the chat. In the interest of time, I'm going to continue on. ADHD, again, is the other main neurodivergent neurotype that comes up a lot when we talk about neurodiversity. And a lot of times, just like a lot of folks think of autism as visually being portrayed as a young white male presenting person playing with trains, ADHD is usually that same kid, but instead of playing with trains, they're jumping around the classroom or they're running around the yard. However, people of any gender can be autistic. People of any gender can have ADHD. Someone who has ADHD may exceed in the classroom setting, may not. The attention deficit phrase, I besides the fact that's a long phrase, I like to use ADHD better because there's not a deficit in attention. It's just hard to direct it. So it's hard sometimes to regulate or process it. People who have ADHD, like myself, we tend to struggle with executive functioning skills. If I am expected to write something for, my graduate program, that blank page can be really intimidating. Just staring at that blank page. I have lots of ideas and thoughts, but it's just hard sometimes to get started. So it can be that initiating task. It can be managing time. For me, I could talk about this all day. So it's really easy for me to get stuck. And all of a sudden, I was like, wow, an hour and a half has passed by while I was working on this craft project or this other, work project or something like that. A lot of times folks just think of ADHD as, ooh, something shiny in a squirrel. And I too love shiny things and squirrels, but it's also potentially, again, it varies by individual, but struggling with maintaining focus and sustaining focus, processing, remembering things, being very, very talkative, or maybe having a less linear style of speech, a lot of fidgeting or movement, but it also can be a very restless brain. So, I mean, as I sit here and rock and, twiddle and fidget a lot, but my brain might be running at warp speed. So again, that is just a very, very short tip of the iceberg for ADHD. With learning disabilities, the main three are dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. Again, very high level overview. Dyslexia is probably what most folks are most familiar with, and that's a learning disability where you struggle to comprehend written language. It can look very different for different individuals. When you're looking at dyslexia, a lot of times folks just think of it as one linear thing. However, there's 4 main subtypes, and there's a lot of different presentations. There is an answer in question in the chat, and I will address that in a moment. Dyscalculia, the cheating way to think of it is kind of like dyslexia, but math. So you struggle with numbers, mathematic symbols, numeric expressions, that sort of thing. And again, just like dyslexia, there's a lot of subtypes under that. Dysgraphia is struggling with handwriting. Your handwriting might be uneven, might be too small. You might struggle to get from your, words from your brain up to your hand because of processing. It is not a physical disability in that your hand, cannot hold the pencil or something like that. That would be considered something else. When we're looking at learning disabilities, the biggest thing is that it's not due to something else. So you can't not write on paper because you're in a cast. That wouldn't be dysgraphia. That would be that you just need accommodations because you physically cannot hold the pen or pencil. And then it needs to persist. So this isn't not just someone's having a rough time with a particular topic or subject. It is something that is persistent and is seen across different disciplines. For children, different classroom types, different subject areas for adults, at the home, at work, community, that sort of thing. And then with learning disabilities, they need to have been started in childhood to be able to be formally diagnosed. However, it is not uncommon for someone to slip through the cracks if they don't have a traditional presentation. I know individuals that are figuring out that they're autistic, have ADHD, dyslexia, like in their 40s, 50s, 60s. I myself didn't realize I was autistic until just a few years ago. I knew that I had ADHD about a decade ago, but didn't realize that. Dyspraxia sometimes gets lumped in with other learning disabilities. However, it is more movement based. So someone who's dyspraxic might struggle with where their body is in relation to other things. So someone who is kind of clumsy, or someone who maybe bumps into things, that sort of thing, could just be actually that they're dyspraxic and just are not identified. There's a lot of co-occurrence in neurodivergent neurotypes. We like to say, you can buy one, get one free. So it's really common for folks who are ADHD, the percentages are potentially as high as in the upper 70s, upper or lower 80s, that someone who has ADHD also has another learning disability like dyscalculia, dysgraphia. Someone who's autistic has a really high probability of being dyspraxic. Like there's a lot of overlap with these different neurotypes. Just want to pause for a minute. In the chat, there's a question. In adult education, sometimes we as instructors do not receive information on whether we have students who are neurodivergent. How can we possibly try to accommodate the possibility that some of our students might be neurodivergent without concretely knowing? As far as I understand, the presentation will be available be recorded for rewatch. You can also email me for a copy of the slides. So with neurodiversity, something to think about is that we don't necessarily always know, and it can be frustrating. But that individual may also not know. Like I said, for me, I didn't realize until after I graduated with my bachelor's that I had ADHD. I just thought that there was, my brain I didn't try hard enough. Something was wrong with me. And so that student may not even know. If your student is receiving accommodations through a disability support services office, then yes, you should get some kind of letter, some kind of notification. But there are plenty of folks who maybe even know their neurotype and are still not, addressing that because they maybe don't think that there's any supports available to them, or they're embarrassed or have some internalized ableism that they think there's something wrong or negative with them. Because a lot of times we've been told our whole lives, that we need to try harder. It's so easy for someone to do X, Y, and Z. Why can't you do that? And so it can be really tough. In the chat, there's a question, what's the youngest age child can be diagnosed with autism? Most providers usually don't diagnose until around 4 or 5-ish is kind of the early end of things. I've seen as low as 2. With ADHD, for instance, like my spouse and I have a teenager, they've allowed me to disclose this. We knew that they had ADHD when they were toddler. It was just very obvious to us because we, at that point, realized we both had ADHD and we could see ourselves very much in that child. But they didn't get formally diagnosed until much later because they're a femme-presenting person. And that can often mean that they're overlooked because if you do not meet the traditional expectation of a medical provider's view of what autism or ADHD or something might look like, then you may not get identified. So that another unique consideration is that there's masking. So someone may consciously or unconsciously try to mask or kind of camouflage that they have a neurodivergent neurotype for a lot of reasons. It might be safety. They might not feel safe sharing how their brain works. They might have been bullied in the past. There's a lot of different reasons. But that masking is exhausting. It's a lot of work to constantly be playing the part of attentive student or, productive employee or something like that. So when we use that energy to mask, that means that we potentially might struggle with a task at hand, whether it's an academic task or whether it's, something around the house. So that's something that there's a lot of language that's really negative. We talk a lot about things that people can't do, not about what they can do. We talk about weaknesses or lack of something, but we don't necessarily talk about strengths. Like someone who is dyslexic, more likely to have great strength in spatial abilities, 3D images, that kind of thing. May be terrible at reading very simple sentences, but may do amazing in some of the different sciences and maths where you're using 3D modeling and some of the higher level conception. there may be someone who is denying it, but more often than not, denial usually comes from someone around the individual. So a child might be like, oh, a parent of a child might say, oh, my child, just kind of clumsy, or they maybe are just kind of quirky or something like that, but they're not dyspraxic, they're not autistic, and so they may not have that support. Other times, again, because sometimes folks may go their whole lives or into adulthood without realizing that they're neurodivergent, they may say, oh, my child can't be autistic because they're just like me and I'm not autistic. It happens a lot. It's really common in a lot of my autistic groups and individual conversations I have, and as you read more about it, there's a lot of individuals who got identified or diagnosed after their child did. Because again, that child's just like me. Oh, okay. It happens a lot. In the chat, someone had shared that they found it during their master's. Yeah, it's really, again, not at all uncommon. The highest age I've seen for someone individually, like that I've spoken with, that realized they're autistic, they were just past 70, like 71, 72-ish, and just finally realizing all this made sense. I get it now because wish someone had told me this sooner. There's also a lack of strong representation. So if you think of autistic person in either movies or TV, there's probably two people that come up a lot. And that is Rain Man, and that is Sheldon from Big Bang. Neither of the individuals, the actual actors, have self-identified as being autistic or any way neurodivergent, and the characters, creators, have not identified them as being autistic. But that is what we think of a lot of times in popular culture media when we say the word autistic. And again, white male, kind of quirky, nerdy, really intelligent, but it's really awkward around the opposite gender. That's a very, narrow view of autism. The more we see people that are gender nonconforming and non-binary individuals, the more we see people that are people who are Black or brown or Indigenous or other person of color, the more we see these different people from different cultures and different life backgrounds also sharing that they're autistic or otherwise neurodivergent, the more other people can see that that person looks like me, seems like me. And so I can connect with that, and I can see how some of my cultural ties might have led me to think that maybe I didn't fall into this category, but maybe I actually am. There's also a lot of times where someone might choose not to identify due to either stigma, but also for safety, and sometimes even for employment. There are some positions, it might be very difficult to get if you identify as someone who has a mental illness, clearance, that sort of thing. So someone might not feel comfortable with that. They may not want to necessarily have to be the poster child for, the very good autistic and answering everything. I personally, again, I love talking about this, so I love that, but that may not be true for everyone. So they may choose to not share that information. Again, also sometimes folks may have really negative experiences in childhood or even in adulthood. Sharing information may be used against them. Bullies aren't just in the grade school setting. And so they may choose to not share that information. And so that can make it difficult in the classroom setting. The biggest thing, remember nothing else, is when we're talking about someone who's neurodivergent or disabled anyway, is presumed competence. Yes, it is important to use, plain language and try to meet people where they are. But a lot of times throughout our lives, we have been talked down to. I have literally seen people, when they found out that I was autistic, change how they spoke to me and started talking to me like a child, like I was their, 8-year-old nephew that played with trains. And I was like, we had fine conversations before. I understood everything you said now. You don't have to, use little words and kind of, pat me on the head. I that's fine. It's also important to choose to learn and educate yourself. Listen to people from the community. If you want to learn about dyslexia, talk to people, read, watch videos, etc., people who are dyslexic. If you want to learn about ADHD, talk to people who have that lived experience. A lot of times we've had people force terms, stereotypes, whatever, from the outside onto us, but it's important to listen to whatever the community is. As a white femme presenting person, I am not going to ever claim that I am in a expert on what it's like to be a Black man, because that is not my lived experience. But if I want to learn more about that, I might choose to join groups where I, there may be lectures, choose to read books like memoirs, choose to learn from whatever the population that I do not personally identify with, because that is their story to share. If you see someone who is being ableist or otherwise disruptive, using negative language, it's important to call that out. It's really tiring to constantly be the one doing the education in a negative experience. However, it's important to also not speak over the individual. So if there's something that potentially bothers you but doesn't bother the person that it's directed towards, then that's not your place to say. However, there is, are ways you can check in with people. You can say, hey, I noticed someone said this or used this term. Are you okay with that? Is that how you prefer to be identified for future? So I can use that language too. Or I noticed, you seemed kind of upset or stressed out after this interaction. Is there anything that I can do to support you? Something like that. Just leave it open-ended. Making things as accessible as possible. If you have the ability to have, meetings or classes from that are hybrid, or having the option of in-person or virtual, doing it, because there are some times where it is a lot of work to drive to a place. I'm able to drive. I have my own car and license and everything like that. However, I choose not to do it as much as possible because it is a sensory assault. I'm constantly trying to filter out some of the different sounds. The light may be really bright, but I can't wear very, very dark sunglasses because I have to be able to see clearly. There's a lot of sudden changes that are unexpected. People merging right in front of me, people not following traffic rules. And it's really hard for me. I struggle with people not following rules, especially when the rules make sense or they're for safety reasons. And it's just a lot of mental energy to get from one place to another. So a lot of times if I'm driving more than 15 minutes, I build in time to sit at where my destination is, just sit in my car, or if it's, hot day or cold day or something like that, in a quiet part of the location where I'm going before I meet up with the person for lunch, before I start my work day, whatever it may be, just to kind of recover and kind of buffer some of that anxiety or stress from just driving to a place. But there are just other ways that we can be accessible. And the biggest thing is asking folks. And in education, we talk a lot about universal design for learning, that we may make a change in one area where we're trying to address something for one people group or, learning styles like that. And we find it has benefits for other people. If you think about someone with a physical disability, sidewalks didn't always have the curb cuts that you see at almost every corner now. And when they were initially, there was a huge push for putting those curb cuts and sidewalks, the corners and that sort of thing. People were mainly thinking of wheelchair users, as this was something that was for people that were wheelchair users. However, we found out that people who maybe used canes or other mobility aids, people who had strollers, people who had suitcases on wheels or pushing carts, that sort of thing, all benefited from this curb cut when we only put it in thinking that a wheelchair user or wheelchair users would benefit from it. So in education, we kind of translate that curb cut effect into universal design for learning. So when you make something more plain language or define jargon, yes, it will help the English language learner, but it might also help a person who has an intellectual disability. So there are just different ways of doing things that we can make things more accessible. We can provide individuals with different formats for things, video, text, long and short form videos versus long and short text. So just thinking about different ways of doing things can really mean a lot to different types of learners. The last one, I know whenever it comes up, it always comes up as kind of seems like it's out there, but people who are neurodivergent, especially people who are autistic, are more likely to identify as being under the LGBT umbrella. So a lot of times it's the neurodivergent umbrella, it's LGBT umbrella, and for some folks, it's much closer than others. So by supporting affirming policies for people who are queer, of which I'm also a member of that community, you make it better for people who are queer, but you also make it better for people who are neurodivergent by default. When you're in the home, one thing we like to say is, celebrate that special interest. I have a child that for a long time and even now really loved Pokemon and loves Pokemon. I know a lot about it, but I can't get that same enthusiasm, excitement. It's just not something that I find madly in love in. But there are other people that have that interest, and that, teenager can go talk to those other people and get that same, excitement and attention. But if you can, try to celebrate that special interest. Try to create a calm space, trying to reduce demands as much as possible. And both in the home and the workplace, one thing that's really big is providing clear expectations and communications. Don't expect someone to read your mind. It's a great relationship advice for anybody, but especially someone who's neurodivergent, brain makes connections in different ways. And so what may seem like a logical train of thought to someone who's neurotypical may seem very illogical to someone who's neurodivergent. In the workplace, it's also important to think about how we can support someone's executive functioning. So providing templates and examples, sample scripts, if someone's going to be talking on the phone a lot. Those are things that we can help people. We can be creative problem solvers and kind of think outside the box. And again, it benefits people who are neurodivergent, and it benefits other people. If we allow a flexible environment for scheduling. Yes, if we allow someone to come in a little bit late and it's not, a huge thing, it does allow someone who has ADHD and maybe struggles with processing and conceptualizing time, but it also helps the person who maybe has a kid or someone who maybe just needs a little bit, overslept a little bit. It benefits everybody. In the chat, someone shared, as a 72-year-old, I too need to collect myself and decompress after driving rush hour. Oh, especially. Driving home today, I'll probably sit in my driveway for probably a good 10 minutes or more before I go into the house. And it's not because I don't love to see my family and my dog, but it's just a lot driving on 695 and 95 and trying to maneuver through, work zones and transition. If I go immediately from that into the workplace or a family setting, something like that, I find that I'm often a little bit either more curt or terse than I mean to be or would like to be, or I may be a little less, a little slower to respond, just maybe a little kind of takes me a little bit longer to answer questions, or I might take a little bit longer to remember something just because I use so much energy to get there. In the classroom, again, you heard me use the term stimming if it doesn't hurt anyone. So if it's not someone who is, banging their head into a wall or something where they physically are hurting themselves, or potentially are doing something like waving their arms around to the point where they might hurt someone else next to them or nearby. If someone wants to stand in the back of your classroom while you lecture or while, we watch a video together, something like that, it doesn't harm anyone if they stand in the back of the classroom. If they stand in front of the classroom and block the screen from people, yes, that is something that we can address. But just realizing that learning doesn't necessarily look the same for everyone. So for someone who's autistic, they may not necessarily like to hold a lot of direct eye contact. It just may seem awkward or uncomfortable. And so for me, a lot of times when I'm talking one-on-one with someone, I'm often looking away and then looking back at them. It's just, I don't know, it seems very weird to stare at someone's eyeballs. And I'm always worried that I'm doing it too much. And then now I look creepy because I'm staring at them. So I do often kind of look away when I'm talking with someone, but that doesn't mean that I'm not listening to them or trying to communicate with them. It's also important if you have the ability to offer alternatives. So does every assignment need to be a huge written assignment, or can someone do like a PowerPoint or Google slide deck or a video with certain parameters. So that way they're still doing the same amount of, research or content presentation, but it's just in a different way. Especially when you're in a like elementary school classroom, you might hear the phrase quiet hands. And so someone who's stimming may be told not to sit there and fidget with your hands. You need to be quiet hands and sitting, not moving. Whole body listening, again, someone doesn't have to be necessarily staring deeply into your eyeballs to be able to be making a connection with the content you're sharing. If someone is receiving accommodations, do everything you can to not single them out. Do not expect them to be the person who is going to speak for everyone. I often will talk about how, this is my lived experience, but that is my lived experience, so I can only say this is what I've experienced, this is what other people have told me about their experiences, but I've never been someone else, so I don't know what it's like to have their lived experience. So it's really important to just consider that there are a lot of different ways to be neurodivergent, and there are a lot of different ways to express that neurodivergency. I know I spoke really, really fast because I really wanted to try to get time. And normally when I do this, I do it in longer sessions. So we have more time to kind of chat and do discussion questions. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. You can use the question and answer function or the chat function. I also, my information is on the screen. I'm also going to put it in the chat. If you would like a copy of the slides, or if you would like a copy of a resource sheet that includes a few of my favorite books, websites, and people to follow that are neurodivergent, I'd be happy to share that with you. And so in the chat is my phone number and email. It is kyork, KYORK @ccbcmd.edu. And phone number is 443-840-1152. And again, my name is Katie York, and I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you so much.
So on behalf of the Maryland Department of Labor, I really want to thank Katie for this unbelievably informative presentation. A lot of really good information here. That's just valuable because as we all know, our teaching goes beyond the academics, and they are a whole person, and they come with, many aspects of who they are, and all those things come out in the classroom one way or another. So thank you so much. This was really great information. Just want to remind everybody that there are a few more sessions tomorrow, family literacy related. So if they are of interest to you, go ahead and sign up for those. Otherwise, again, Katie, thank you so much. And I wish everybody a good evening.
Thank you.